Did Montreal really happen, or was it just a dream? Unpredictable weather, sensational overtakes, strategy battles, a three-way fight for victory. There was even a time when Haas looked on course for a serious points haul. Formula One is serving up some spectacular racing in 2024, and there's plenty more to come as we now go into a triple header starting with this weekend's Spanish Grand Prix. Welcome to F1 Nation with me, Tom Clarkson, and my teammate this week is 1996 World Champion and winner of the Spanish Grand Prix back in 1994, Damon Hill. Damon, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Tom, and I did enjoy the Canadian Grand Prix. What a great race, what fun, as always, absolutely brilliant. Little sprinkling of rain, not torrential deluge as they had in the Le Mans race over the weekend, just enough to make it tricky to judge. And you said it was a dream. It was a dream, but it was a nightmare for Ferrari. So it wasn't a dream for everyone. And also, Mercedes found pace. They found some speed. So, bodes well for what's coming up.
I do remember on the preview show, you telling everybody that you thought it would be a McLaren 1-2. Okay, you got the 2 with Lando. I suppose there were moments in that race when McLaren had the fastest car, so you weren't totally wrong.
If I was totally wrong, I definitely would go and look for a different job. But I think I got close. It was a good race, from their point of view. I think they were looking very, very strong, particularly at the beginning of the race. It looked like Lando had it all really under control. And then he got the payback from Miami, didn't he, really, with the safety car? And he got caught out with that. It could have all been so different.
Could have been. But look, it's time for a very exciting triple header with Spain, Austria and Silverstone coming up. Extra points are going to be up for grabs in Austria, of course, because the Red Bull Ring will host the third F1 sprint of the season. But Damon, before we break it down team by team, I did want to ask, how do you think the championship's going to look after the British Grand Prix, after this triple header? Do you see Red Bull extending their advantage? Do you see everyone closing the gap a little bit?
Yeah, I think they're definitely closing the gap. Whether they can get much further ahead than where they are is going to be the big, $64 million question, because Max has got an advantage. He's got a points advantage already. And if all things are equal, in other words, if his car is as good as everyone else is, he's going to win as many races as they are, because he's brilliant. So I don't know. I think he could maintain this advantage. But strange things happen in our sport, don't they? And I think when he's got more people attacking him, it seems to be the case. Let's say Mercedes have found a solution and they perform well in Barcelona, which is a real test of your aerodynamics, which is a place where we think that the Red Bull is going to smash everyone. If McLaren are in the mix, if Ferrari are in the mix, if Mercedes are in the mix, then Max has got a bit of a problem on his hands. He's got more than just one person to worry about. So that could rob him of quite a lot of points. But whether, there's so many people squabbling over the other points, they can mount a campaign against him to bring him down, I think that's probably unlikely.
Red Bull are 49 points clear of Ferrari in the constructor standings, and Max is 56 ahead of Charles Leclerc. And for me, I think the next 3 races do look more Red Bull territory than the last 3 races, certainly. The last 2 races, think Monaco, think Montreal, curbs, bumps. We know that the Red Bull doesn't like that, whereas we're now heading back to what you might call Red Bull territory, right? Barcelona is a fast racetrack, made faster last year when we're now not using that chicane at the end of the lap. We've got those 2 fast corners to end the lap. And you're not going near the curbs in Barcelona. So I see it slightly ominous that I think Max, he won all 3 of these races last year and he starts, for me, as favourite for all 3 this time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that he's going to be happier with these tracks coming up. As he mentioned on the radio in Canada, I can't go near the curbs. I can't touch the curbs. Well, you need to in Canada, but with the extra speed and the extra downforce of the tracks coming up, that won't bother him at all. The car will have so much load on it, it won't be bothered. And also the curbs are different. They're not the same kind of challenge in Austria even. Austria, they're pretty flat. In fact, they usually run so far off the track that they get track penalties or track limit penalties. So they can easily use the curbs in Austria, Silverstone, and Barcelona.
We'll come on to Austria perhaps in a little bit, but there are going to be new track limits enforcements there to stop people running wide. But also, Damon, Max has won 2 races this year where he had anything but the fastest car. Look at Imola. He wasn't the fastest car that weekend, and yet he somehow dragged that performance out to win. And I think you can say the same in Montreal. Lando Norris said after the race in Montreal, we should have won today, and we didn't. And it seems to me that the combination of Max doing the job in the cockpit, and Red Bull very rarely make mistakes on the pit wall as well. They're still such a good racing team with a capital R. They really understand the game. And so that combination is devastatingly effective still.
They're really on top of everything. They're like the SAS, really, aren't they? I mean, when you go into battle with them, you've got to have your wits about you, because they're quick as a flash, and they see it coming, they anticipate, and they're very, very effective as a race team.
The one question mark that I hold over them is their decision to commit 2 more years to Sergio Perez so early in this season, because everything about his performance in recent races doesn't stack up to a driver deserving one of the best cars in Formula One. You know, what did he do? He qualified 16th in Canada. The team actually suggested that he drive back to the pits with that damaged rear wing, and he's now carrying a 3-place grid penalty into the Spanish Grand Prix, which is going to make his chances there very difficult, because it's invariably quite hard to overtake in Barcelona. So I don't know. What do you make of them signing Perez when you've got the likes of Liam Lawson around? Even Yuki Tsunoda, I think, is doing a great job. Why sign Perez so early in the season? I would have left him to prove himself a bit more.
When you look at the options of who you'd put in, okay, he's not somebody who is so hot that you need him to make your team a winning team, because he clearly is not as good as Max. Max, they want to keep at the team, and he's happy with Checo. Checo just needs to be second to Max, really.
Damon, that is the point. He's not finishing second to Max.
I understand that, yeah. But the thing is, it's getting so close now. I mean, look at the difference in lap times. They're just insanely small gaps. In fact, sometimes they're no gap at all. So we saw in Canada that the qualifying gap between first and second was nothing, not measurable. So the gaps are tiny. That's why the position for him has suffered on the grid, because there's more people who can jump in that gap. So he does need to up his game, but of course you don't want somebody who can out-qualify Max. Well, Max doesn't want anyone who out-qualify Max. So
do you think there's anyone on the grid who would out-qualify Max, though? I don't think there is right now.
You think so? Okay, I'm gonna throw a few possibles in there. I'm going to say Lewis has lost a tiny bit of edge this year. I'm not saying he couldn't get it back again if he was in competition with Max. Fernando, similarly, I think maybe as you get older, the real sharp speed seems to go. Maybe George, maybe Charles. There are still some candidates out there who could surprise him and put pressure on him that he wouldn't enjoy. But then there obviously those people are nailed on somewhere, so they're not going to be coming to Red Bull.
But I stand by Yuki, Liam Lawson. I think they would be doing a better job than Sergio Perez right now. But what I would have done if I was the senior management is, okay, when the car is difficult to drive, it seems Max is able to get more out of it. And Montreal is a difficult track for that car. Monaco is a difficult track for that car. Whereas we're now going back, as I said earlier, to Red Bull territory, medium to high speed tracks where you keep off the curbs by and large. So it should come back into the realms of being an easier car to drive. Therefore, Checo should be closer to Max at these next few races. And I would have perhaps waited until after this triple header at least to see what he can do in the car.
If you want Max to stick with you and be confident that he knows what the future is going to be like, then maybe signing Checo is a way of saying to him, look, this is what the future is going to look like. You're not going to have a surprise new super quick teammate to worry about who might take a lot of attention. If you're Liam Lawson, you have to establish yourself. You can't just come into F1 and be a dutiful number 2. So he'll be a threat. Yuki has done an amazing job. I don't know if he could take the pressure of being in the sharp end of Red Bull. I don't know.
The Montreal spec Daniel Ricciardo would have done a great job for that team.
Possibly, yes. But he's got to do more, as we know. I mean, he got heavily criticised, didn't he, famously by Jacques in Canada. And Jacques will say that the king has got no clothes on. He's the kid who will say that thing that everyone else is frightened of saying. And he did call him out. You know, he called out, well, where is this performance? Where's the justification for someone staying in F1? with Daniel Ricciardo, and we've all been thinking it, and he's been thinking it. But I think it was a little bit hard to blurt it out quite as brutally as that. But that's Jacques, and I know Jacques very well, and I get on very well with him. But he will say what everyone else is frightened of saying. And the thing is, you could say the same about Checo. He just needs to step it up a bit. But I don't know how you do it, but yeah, he knows. He's had a really rough ride recently, hasn't he? He's had some real horrors the last couple of races.
I thought we might get a bit of a bump in performance from him, safe in the knowledge that he's got the 2-year contract in his back pocket. I thought we would see a better performance from him as a result when we got to Montreal, but that wasn't the case. And it's going to be, as I said, difficult again in Barcelona because of that grid penalty, but we shall see. Now, look, why don't we move on to McLaren and Ferrari? McLaren have now beaten Ferrari in 4 of the last 5 races as they continue to be the most consistent team so far this season. They've scored 116 points in the last 4 rounds, more than anyone else, and Lando Norris is the only driver to have taken points from every Grand Prix this year. Ferrari's double DNF in Montreal means they're now just 40 ahead of McLaren in the constructors' standings. So, Damon, what lessons do you think McLaren need to learn from Canada to take the next step to become regular winners?
Don't get holed up by the safety car, which, I mean, I have to say that was a risk, staying out just that little bit longer. Maybe tactically that was something they would have will revisit, but I think they're heading in the right direction. So they're doing the right things. The big test, I think, will be someone like Barcelona for them. It's a pure aerodynamic high load track, so tyre deg is much more brutal in the car in a different way to the last few tracks we've been to. But let's say Miami, even, this is a circuit that eats tyres. Your left front goes because it's so loaded. It's having to do all the work for so long in the lap. So we shall see where they are after that one.
Well, let's not forget, Damon. Let's not forget that Lando Norris qualified 3rd at Barcelona last year, and then he lost his front wing, or a bit of his front wing, on the opening lap at turn 2-3 when he hit the back of Lewis Hamilton. So the car was quick over 1 lap last year, and we weren't able to see what it could do in the race because, as I say, he was then at the back. What we saw in Canada was Red Bull at the top of their game, McLaren still learning, still just a little bit raw, I felt. I don't know, I just feel that Red Bull would have pitted him where he ended up doing another lap behind the safety car. That's my gut feeling, and I think if we had that race again, they would do that. They would have learned from that. I think they'll be more aggressive strategically.
You only learn these things when you run at the front regularly. So if you've been running in the midfield, the spotlight isn't quite so intense. So you're going to get increased criticism for every little potential loss of performance or a tactical mistake or whatever. So they've got to deal with that as well. And then it gets to the point where eventually you're expected to win. And if you don't win, then something, the world has fallen down. There's a flip side to being better in any sport, is that you can only lose once you're at the sharp end.
And there was a very, I thought, very interesting change in Lando's outlook between when he first got out of the car in Canada to when he actually arrived in the press conference to speak to me and the rest of the media. In that initially he was like, okay, great race, really enjoyed it, we finished 2nd, brilliant, aren't we doing well? To, by the time he got to me, was, yeah, we should have won that race. And I'm a bit frustrated, actually. It almost took a while for the penny to drop.
Yes, I think that has been, a default position for Lando. I think he knows that it's no good unless you win. And especially if you've had an opportunity and somehow it slipped through your fingers, then you will lament and rue the whatever happened in the race and that meant you came 2nd, because he wants to win. And I think that is the right mindset. That's the right position to be in. If you're satisfied with 2nd, obviously, if you're on your way up and you're trying to recover from a setback or lack of performance, and you get yourself to 2nd place, and you can celebrate that. But now they've got to the point where they can have a win. I think that he's right to be disappointed.
Damon, tell us about that change in mindset for a driver. Now, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I'm guessing that when you won that first race in Hungary 1993, it was like, what a result, fantastic. And then you go and win a couple more, and it's just like brilliant. But then at what point do you actually start saying, no, I want to do this at every race now? I'm not just happy to win occasionally. Was there a moment when the penny dropped for you? Was it in 93? Did it happen later in 94?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take you back to my motorcycling days, Tom, because for a long time I raced and I turned up at an event with a bike and I entered the race, and I had never really thought about how you win. I just literally turned up and went, I'll ride as fast as I can. And I've kind of in my mind always expected to be racing people. And then one day I went down to Brands Hatch and I was in a bit of a strop, a bit more pumped up than usual. And I got off the line and I was leading. And I remember thinking, oh, there's no one to race. There's no one in front of me. Now what do I do? And there's a huge difference. There is an absolutely massive difference.
Is that a conscious thought? Genuinely, you're actually going, what do I do now?
Conscious. Suddenly it's a surprise. Suddenly you find yourself, now all these guys in F1 have won. They've won in karts. They've won in all that. They're used to being at the front. But the big one is Formula One. And so once you're at the sharp end, their mentality does change. It has to change. Coming second is no good. It's not what you're there to do. And I think a lot of people are comfortable. Well, they make their goal being in Formula One. You hear it all the time with new drivers, their goal, I made it to Formula One. Did Ayrton Senna say, I'm glad I got to Formula One? No, he didn't. Did Michael Schumacher say, it's great to be here? No, they're there to win. And that is the goal. That's the only reason you should be in Formula One, is to get to the front of the pack and win. The question is whether it's realistic. So you asked me about Hungary. And the question is, when I was in a Brabham, of course, I wasn't going to win, but I still had to try. But when I'm in a Williams, I've really got to deliver the full potential of that car, which means winning.
Yeah, I feel we're seeing a change in outlook from Lando now. He knows that winning is the only thing that matters, and that car's been improving steadily from Austria last year, and he will be going into the Spanish Grand Prix this weekend, aware that Red Bull are going to be quick, but his only mindset is and has to be, I'm going to win this Grand Prix.
Yes, it will be. Yeah, but they're very good. I mean, they understand the psychology. They've had so much coaching and stuff, but quite apart from their own instinctive competitiveness, they will understand that you can't get ahead of yourself. You go and do the job better than you've done it before, the previous race, and you turn up and you to some degree you have to let what happens happen. But I think with Lando, he's always been dissatisfied with being just someone who makes up the numbers. And Oscar as well. I mean, I can see that in Oscar. He's not someone who's going to be content making up the numbers. So all the good guys, they know the real goal, the real point of being there is to be the person at the front.
Well, Damon, what are Ferrari going to be thinking? They obviously had a torrid time in Montreal, neither car making it to the flag. The car wasn't competitive at any point, really, by their recent standards. And so what happens? We go to Barcelona. Charles Leclerc qualified on pole for the Spanish Grand Prix in 2022. He qualified 19th last year. So the yo-yo effect, I don't know what to expect from them, quite frankly, going into Spain. And it's Carlos Sainz's home race. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, Carlos he's been unceremoniously uninvited to Ferrari. Now he's going to Spain. So he'll be very keen, I think, to get the maximum result he can there. But we don't know what to expect. And it's a head scratcher, isn't it? Ferrari are up and down. They are unpredictable. And why were they slow in Canada? I still can't work it out. I mean, they shouldn't have been that far off the pace, but they were nowhere.
What will be perplexing them is just their genuine lack of pace at a track that should have suited them, because it's all about traction out of slow corners in Montreal is an important factor, and that's where the Ferrari's really good. Yet we're going to a track now which is all about medium and high speed. So, and let's not forget that wind the clock back a couple of years, they were suffering from graining a lot. And as you said earlier, Barcelona is tough on that front left tyre in particular. So I don't know. I feel that it's going to be a tough weekend for Ferrari, I think, in my gut, but I think we can be more confident about the pace of Mercedes, because they had their best weekend of the season in Canada, with George Russell taking pole position and then securing the team's first podium of 2024 with P3 in the race. Look, before we get on to their chances in Spain specifically, I did want to discuss with you something that technical director James Allison said in Montreal, funnily enough, for this week's episode of F1 Beyond the Grid, because I asked him how their new front wing has improved the car's performance, and this is what he said.
The thing that has bedeviled us from the start of the year was that you could get the car okay in a slow corner, you get it quite decent in a fast corner, but you couldn't get it good in both at the same time. What has changed in the last 2-3 races is that we've modified the car in such a way as it actually has a reasonable high to low speed balance and a reasonable through corner balance. It just means that the driver can trust both the front and rear axle in a fast corner and a slow corner, and can trust it from when he hits the brakes at the beginning of the corner all the way through the apex and out the other side. That balance is crucial to a driver, that they know whether the car is going to understeer or oversteer, and that it's going to follow the trajectory they're asking.
Was it one eureka moment where someone came to you and said, James, this is what we need to do, or was it more incremental gains?
This is more of a, oh God, how could we have been so dumb type moment where you see the path forward and you should have seen it sooner.
George Russell, after his pole position in Canada, was saying, we've found the path forward now. So do you think you can be competitive at every racetrack going forward?
I think that we definitely can get the car this season to be properly competitive and to fear no tracks. I think that the specifics of this circuit might make our fans think prematurely that we're already there. This circuit has quite a low range of cornering speeds in it, and it tests the car maybe slightly less severely than some of the others that are coming up. And while I'm pretty sure that we will make a good showing in the nearby future races, I'd be surprised if we're on pole at the next one, for example. But I am absolutely certain that we can be as fast as anybody over the coming period.
Damon, fighting talk from James Allison. They've had a few false dawns in the last few years, and those have invariably come at the Spanish Grand Prix, where the car, with those super slim side pods, has been very competitive there. And let's not forget, last year Hamilton finished second, Russell third in Spain. And I feel just James Allison, by the way, I loved his comment, how can we have been so dumb? It's as if the solution has been staring at them in the face all along, is sort of what I read from that comment. But he is so experienced that he wouldn't be talking like that if they weren't going to be good going forward.
It seems to me like they've stumbled on a trick that other people are up to, an opportunity that they perhaps hadn't seen as being as important as it really is. What he was saying there was talking about throughout the range of speeds, because the car is a dynamic thing. The aerodynamics are relatively static unless you can get them to change their characteristics from slow through to medium to fast. Then you've got a different car at different speeds. And that's what he was talking about, was that drivers, they get the confidence now that it's going to do roughly the same thing as the speed increases or decreases, so that they know what sort of beast they're driving. If they found that tweak, that little trick, and they can deliver to the drivers a car that maintains some consistency, then that is a step forward for them. I mean, the front wing on a car, front wings basically, since Benetton, I don't know if you remember Benetton, when Gerhard was driving, they had this huge front wing that it was basically a great big spoon. It sort of just sat on the front of the car. And I remember Adrian Reynard, who was very close to the Benetton crew and aerodynamicists, and he was talking about his Formula 3 car and just said it's all about the front wing. That's all he said. He just said, as long as you can get the front wing to work, then the rest of it takes care of itself. So since that time, since that discovery, everything has been about the front wing. And everything else that follows behind the car has to kind of marry up with what the front wing is doing. So these things, you imagine it's the first thing that breaks the air as the car comes along the track. So what it's doing is really critical to the whole aerodynamic performance of the car. So if you've got a change of the front wing, it's quite significant.
Yeah, and it's giving the drivers more confidence, and particularly, it seems, George Russell. He's outqualified Lewis Hamilton, no slouch, at every race bar one this year. Give us your assessment, Damon, on the job George is doing this year. Has he surprised you?
I mentioned, I think, in another podcast that I do as well, Tom, with like regular broadcasts of Sky. But I did talk about this. I discussed it. That Lewis was expressing disappointment with his performance. He didn't feel like he delivered the best of himself in that particular race. But George did do a fantastic job. But I mean, George is a little bit buoyed up by the fact that he's probably getting a lot more of the attention. Necessarily because Lewis is off, so he's trying desperately to establish himself as the kingpin in that team, so that they get confidence in him. And he has been delivering. I think he's still expressing himself in the car, sometimes with slight desperation. I thought some impressive attempts at overtaking, but slightly risky. So those sort of skills are useful when it comes to qualifying, and he got himself on pole position. He's driving very well and giving them some hope, giving the team some hope.
You say that he's getting maybe more of the attention, but another thing that James and I discuss in that Beyond the Grid that is going to be available on your podcast app and the official F1 YouTube channel from Wednesday. One of the other things we discussed was the whole Lewis question in terms of, how you see out the year, and what Lewis's comments about not being able to out-qualify George for the rest of the year. Remember, he said that in Monaco, and he just says Lewis is getting exactly the same kit as George. And we took one wing to Monaco, and it was Lewis who said, give it to George.
What I'm suggesting is there will be certain things that are to do with next year that Lewis can't be privy to. If Lewis is going, then they really do need to build George up, because he'll be the only known quantity they'll have for the following year. The team have to be all around him, I think, and saying, okay, what do you want? What do you need? Lewis can look after himself. He knows the team well enough. He will deliver. And between now and the end of the season, if that car's any good, the Lewis might even win some races, which would be good. But George has done a fantastic job to hold his own against a 7-time world champion.
One of the other things we discussed is who is going to be George Russell's teammate next year. And Kimi Antonelli seems to be in pole position for that, with Toto Wolff even saying in Montreal, Kimi is our future. And I think we went another step closer the week after Montreal at the World Motorsport Council in Uzbekistan. Lovely country, by the way. I was there. But the FIA has updated part of its international sporting code, adding a clause that says, although the minimum age for a super license to drive in Formula One remains 18 years old, special dispensation may be granted to certain drivers to receive one at 17. Now, Kimi is 17. He turns 18 at the end of August. So he is now, as of today, free, because he's already got the necessary 40 super license points to qualify for a super license. He could appear at a Grand Prix anytime from now going forward, whether that's just as an FP1 drive, because of course all the teams have to have 2 young drivers in over the course of the year. So maybe he could do that for Williams, he could do it for Mercedes, he could potentially race this year. And there's a lot of chat going around at the moment that could that happen as early as the British Grand Prix? Who knows? But I did want to ask you, Damon, I don't know, were you racing bikes by the time you were 17? Because is 17, I know Max Verstappen came in 2015, age 17, but what are your thoughts on being a 17-year-old and being thrown to the wolves, effectively? You're going in to a team that can win races in 25. Mercedes should be a team that you can win races with.
If you remember when you were 16, Tom, 15, 16, you got no fear. The frontal lobe hasn't properly wired up so that the rational reasoning part of the brain isn't fully developed until you're about 25. The problem we have then is what you saw with Max, which was he was doing what he thought he could get away with, and everyone else is going, whoa, mate, there's other people here too. It's not just about you. It's a conceptual problem when you're very young, really, is the issue. It's nothing to do with whether you're capable of driving very fast. It is an issue, I think, to do with maturity and whether or not that person is driving in a way that is taking into account the consequences for those around them as well. You have no fear when you're young.
But everything you've just described applies to the average person, right? Kimi Antonelli surely is purely from a driving point of view, above average. Everything we've seen of him in the junior formulas, everything that Mercedes have seen of him driving the 2-year-old car that he has been driving in Barcelona, Silverstone, Austria recently, would suggest that he's not your average 17-year-old, and maybe his development rate is different.
He's probably mature enough to be an excellent tactical driver and great overtaker and all those things that we hope to see from the very best. But I'm just saying, if you're talking about just the age limit, what's the point of bringing in an age limit and then saying, oh, on a special occasion we'll make an exception? Well, there is an age limit. Well, there isn't. What's the point? Why don't they just judge people on whether or not the FIA think that they're mature enough and capable enough to enter F1? I mean, I don't know.
Everything I've seen from Kimi Antonelli suggests that he is brilliant. Although I do think you have a valid point that there should be a line which you can't cross. I thought the FIA had decided that was 18, but it is still 18. Only exceptional circumstances can 17-year-olds come in. We're going to be joined now by Aston Martin's performance director, Tom McCullough. Tom, great to have you on the show. Do want to talk all things Aston and Barcelona with you, but Damon and I have just been talking about, the minimum age for drivers to come into Formula One. Now, you've been engineering drivers in Formula One for so many years. What's your thought on minimum ages, and what is the difference between a young guy coming in and someone aged 30? Where's the main evolution?
Hello, Tom, Damon. I have worked with a lot of young drivers over the years, you're right. And the bottom line is that if a driver is talented and he can gain the experience through testing, through starting very young and, doing lots of seat time before he even gets to Formula One, if the driver's talented enough, if he's smart enough and he's in the right environment with the right people feeding him the right information at the right time, there's a very good chance he'll do very well.
But do you think the young guys are more aggressive maybe than the 30-year-olds? Are they doing something on track that's different?
Well, I work with a 40-year-old who's pretty aggressive and pretty full on. The commitment that Fernando has in the car is all that of a youngster, I suppose. I think in a way you don't know what you don't know when you're young, and you've got that self-confidence. You've come up through the junior categories when you've been, every time you've done a session, a practice session, a qualifying session, you come in, you look at the top of the timesheets because you're always there. The people who get to Formula One are the talented, very capable drivers. And I think one of the hardest things when rookies first come into Formula One is accepting that you're only going to be up there if you've got a car capable of it. And sometimes, they find that a bit hard to deal with. I remember in particular Nico Hülkenberg, when he first started driving, not only did he want to beat his teammate, he thought he could get the car up to the top of the timesheets, but that isn't the reality, and I think that's the bit mentally got to be...
I got to pick you up on that, TM. Pole position in Brazil 2010, he was right.
We were a little bit fortunate with a few calls there, but at the end of the day, when it's raining intermittent, dry, wet, and Nico went out, and again that was just pure natural talent, getting the tyres working, being first out the pit lane, driving hard, and he put it on pole position when others made mistakes. But back to the the young drivers, I think there's no substitute for talent, and if you've got talent and you're in the right environment, you don't have the experience, but nowadays you can do a lot of things to overcome experience, and as long as you learn from every day at the track, you walk away from the track having learnt, not just driven. You got to learn what you've done well, then quickly that experience comes.
I totally agree with what you're saying. I mean, you've got quite a lot of change in the sport over the last decade or so, 20 years maybe, since I stopped racing, because the maturity of the guys that come through now is astonishing. I'm always staggered that they're so capable in front of a microphone in television and with the team, and they're totally professional. The training is clearly very, very important. The preparation that they get before they get to the hot seat is worth a lot, isn't it, to the team?
It is, and it's also on the engineering side. The level of analysis, reporting, drawing the right information out of the data, presenting it to the drivers in a consumable manner. I often say to the engineers here, we're developing the drivers as well as the car. It doesn't matter how much knowledge and experience they have, whether they're Fernando Alonso or, Jack Crawford, Felipe Drugovich at the other end of the scale. Our job is to educate them so they've got the knowledge to get better and get the most out of the equipment. I even read reports from a few years ago and you think, wow, we've come on so far in the way we analyse and present data. And that's just the whole industry. The margins are so small. And in a way, if you do that right, from the simulator to the testing to the race weekend execution, the drivers are better prepared.
It's a famous golf story. And it was about a guy, and I'll spare him his blushes, but he famously interviewed Tiger Woods when he was very young as an amateur. And he said he's going to turn pro. And the guy says, so what do you want to do? And he says, I want to win all these majors and I want to win all this. And I looked at him sort of wryly and said, I think you've got a lot to learn, son.
Yes.
And anyway, he looked ridiculous after that interview. So you have the talent of the young, and some drivers have this self-awareness of their capabilities, don't they? You'd obviously deal with who's had that and still has it in Fernando Alonso. So you're at the other end of that learning curve. I mean, how much did he give back to you? You obviously re-signed him again because he's just so valuable to the whole team effort.
Fernando's a phenomenal driver. Having watched him from the outside for so many years, you have a preconceived idea a bit of his strengths and weaknesses. We listen to the driver to engineer radio footage during sessions qualifying the race. And you think, wow, he's, I used to say to the strategy people here, he's a driver doing the strategy for the cars in front, the cars behind in his own car. He's got that capacity. He's a prime example who's someone who's got a lot of talent, who's gained a lot of knowledge, and he's learned from it. And that's a key. You've got to learn day in, day out what does work, what's order one, what doesn't really matter, because there's so much in Formula One. I often say the drivers are the best sensors in the car. You can do a whole load of testing, you can do a whole load of running, and at the end of the day you can sit down with him and he will pinpoint the stuff you need to spend a bit more time looking at. He can't do all the analysis, but he'll say, I think that was important, or at least go and look at it because the car was definitely better there. So if it isn't your setup test, maybe it's just the weather, maybe it's the tyres, but he's got that real ability to feel the car and to know what's important, and he's the most efficient driver I've ever worked with. And by that I mean he will only say what's worth saying in a debrief, and you got to listen.
Driver is the best sensor in the car. I'm going to remember that, Tom. I like you a lot. I liked you before, but I like you even more now.
You'd like to have worked with Tom McCullough.
I think he's made a very valid point. It's very easy as an engineer to look at things purely as on an experimental lab basis, and the driver is somehow the problem because they don't conform to, numbers and computer programs. But that is a really important insight, and it's great that they can learn from other drivers. It's good.
Well, Tom, can we talk about your racing car now? Because both your drivers back in the points in Montreal for the first time since Australia. So, a bit of a renaissance going on. Can you continue it at the Spanish Grand Prix this weekend?
Yeah, it was obviously a strong weekend for us. We went into the Montreal weekend having had two difficult weekends when we felt we'd not got the most out of the car, the weekend, the whole lot. And in such fine margins, if you don't execute it well, you walk away, especially in the area of the grid we're fighting at the moment, you walk away with not a lot. So when we were approaching the Montreal weekend and the weather was, forecast rain every single day, the jeopardy of a track like that where there's concrete walls at the edge of the track in most places, we thought the DNA of the track would suit the car reasonably well. We sat the drivers down pre-event and said, there's an opportunity here because some people won't get the most out of it. And if we all, whether it's the engineers, the mechanics, the drivers, as a team, if we get the most out of it and play the risk-reward balance sensibly, there's a very good chance we walk away with a decent haul of points. And everyone sits and listens, but you just steering the weekend, during the race weekend, reminding people of that when there are many risk-reward decisions to be made, and it's just execute, try to, get the most out. And the drivers, to be honest, they didn't put a foot wrong. The car isn't easy to drive at the moment. When you're in those conditions, intermediates, wets, drying line, you put one tyre half off the drying line, as a few drivers did, and you're eating the barriers straight away. And, the two of our drivers were exemplary the entire weekend, and you sit in the post-race debrief and there was a sense of satisfaction. It's like, right, that was the game plan, we executed it, we've got 14 points, which is our biggest haul of the year. We were happy with that one.
Well, and have you got the raw performance then to continue with a double points finish in Barcelona? Are you taking upgrades to the next race?
We are, Tom, but everyone brings upgrades. We've got some mechanical, we've got some aero upgrades, but it's a relative game. We have rattled out on average the fifth fastest team this year. At times we've been better, especially in qualifying, where obviously the DRS is quite important. That's one real strength of our car. But if you just analyse the pure race pace, we have been very close to the fifth fastest team. Of late, Mercedes have stepped a little bit closer to the guys at the front. And, we keep finding ourselves, as we did the back end of last year and a few times this year, in quite close battles with VCARB. That's a team with a strong car, and, we're often fighting them both in qualifying and the race. So we're typically just a bit stronger than them. But it's between now and the end of the year, our job is to close that gap back to the cars in front of us, to be able to have the race pace to fight with them, because at the moment we're just a little bit behind them.
And what are the challenges of Barcelona then? Can we talk about the racetrack? What do you need from your racing car in Barca? I seem to remember it was quite hard for you guys last year in Barca. I remember Alonso having an off in qualifying and never quite recovering.
Yep, remember the first lap in the first qualifying session, it had been raining. He had a snap opening the lap in through the last corner, and then ran through the gravel trap and did a whole load of damage to the underfloor of the car. So he was on the back foot that weekend. Yeah, Barcelona with a revised layout, one that Damon remembers maybe from the old days, but it's very much high-speed, grip-limited dominated. There's less low-speed content now, and there's really only turn 5 and turn 10, which you can sort of categorise as low-speed. The rest of it's medium and high-speed. The efficiency of the track means you can put on quite a lot of dirty downforce, and the car has to be strong in high-speed corners, because that's ultimately where you're damaging the tyres too, especially we can have some quite high track temperatures. The one thing, the opposite end of the scale really to Canada, which is dominated by low and medium speed corners, and there's such a high ride input, while Barcelona is one of the lowest ride input tracks of the year. Both, you don't use a lot of curbs, and the actual surface, the tarmac was resurfaced not that long ago, and tends to be one of the ones you can run the car relatively stiff in heave and in roll, and the ride doesn't cause you too much of a worry.
Tom, you've had the team has grown with the factory and the rest of it, moving into this big new facility. And are you able to extract all the gains from your factory and your correlations and wind tunnels and all that stuff yet? Or are you still a little bit trying to settle in?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Now we're on that journey at the moment. The new wind tunnel isn't online until the end of this year, early next year. We have a new simulator, state-of-the-art simulator, which again is coming online in the coming months. As a workforce, we've grown from 350 to well over 800 now, and the team has grown in all areas, all departments. Still, there's a core group of people who are designing, developing the car, the manufacturing side. There's a lot of areas that have grown, but the core development team has grown, but isn't vastly different. Sometimes you think you want to be further ahead than you are. Of course, it's Formula One, you want to be fighting up at the front. The start of last year, we were able to fight for podiums regularly when others were maybe struggling a bit more, and we were competitive. We aren't quite as competitive at the moment, but as a team, we're growing, we're learning. Bob Bell joined us recently. He's adding to that experience pool and helping us with the way we're looking not only to getting the most out of the current car and next year's car, but very much the 2026 car. He's obviously been involved a lot with big picture regulation changes, and his experience is invaluable at the moment, helping steer the technical ship as he is doing now.
Here's an aside, Tom. Beyond the grid this week is James Allison. I asked him at the end of that who he would most like to be stuck in a lift with, and he said Bob Bell.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by that. I did not know Bob until he started here a few months ago, but he's a very easy person to get on with, very unassuming, very calm, very knowledgeable, and I can see exactly why James says that.
Well, look, final one from us, Tom, is just how do you see the pecking order in Spain? Do you see yourselves where you were in Canada, and do you think it'll be a Red Bull type track?
I do think Red Bull will be strong there. I think Ferrari were the ones who really obviously struggled in Montreal. We were able to be more competitive than really in every session, and that allowed us to score a load of points when they obviously had a tough weekend. I expect them to be back strong. There's nothing to say McLaren, Red Bull and Ferrari won't all be fighting for the front of the grid. And Mercedes have improved. Let's see it, this track is a very different track, but for sure they're getting more competitive. We saw some of the lap times Lewis was able to do. It's interesting when you try to do some analysis from Montreal, because at times, as Damon will be able to relate to more than you and I, Tom, but the risk level that you can take on a drying track at one point, when you look at how fast Lewis was, he was just faster than anyone can do, fuel corrected, tyre corrected. But I also think he was pretty pushing hard, and in those kind of tracks that bite quite easy. I think we'll get a better idea of exactly where people rattle out with what looks like a dry weekend in Barcelona.
And just very quickly, which of these three tracks coming up, Tom, Barcelona, Austria, Silverstone, do you think you guys will be strongest at?
They have a lot of similarities. There's the high speed, grit limited content's important for them all. I think our car, with its DRS switch and its efficiency, will probably favour Silverstone, Austria, and then Barcelona. But saying that, we have some updates for Barcelona, and we'll be trying our best to be as fast as we can be.
How's the boss coping with the stresses of the reality of progress in Formula One? Because it's fair to say that Aston had a fantastic start to last year, and it's faded away, and you're really struggling to re-find your traction again.
Yeah, Lawrence is a very passionate and enthusiastic member of our team. He wants us to be as competitive as we can be. Obviously loved the start of last season, where, at least in position, if you analyse the pace relative to the front at the start of last year, we were still a reasonable chunk off Red Bull at the time. But we were able to have some good results. The gap between Red Bull and ourselves has obviously been filled with a few teams. We're fighting to get back into there. But Lawrence is, even though he can be a passionate, should we say, member of the team, he understands that Formula One isn't overnight. He's been in the industry for many, many years, actually, watching from the sides, but also involved with teams for 30 odd years, and he knows the level it's at now, that it's about building the right group of people, giving them the right facilities, giving them the right leadership and direction, and steering the ship to making the car as competitive as possible. And if you sort of look to where we're heading with Honda and the 2026 regulation change, very much our focus at the moment, and we're having to, in the background, do a lot of work on designing and developing a gearbox and hydraulics and a lot of the suspension that we haven't been designing and manufacturing ourselves. We're into that process now, and you can't do everything and be instantly the best team. And he's aware of that. Very supportive, I'd say.
He's not a member of the team. He's the owner.
You're very right there.
He might make that distinction. But anyway, I get what you're saying.
100%. You're right.
Tom, great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your thoughts and your insight. And Damon and I look forward to seeing you in Barcelona.
Lovely. Well, great talking to you both. See you in Spain.
Excellent. Thank you.
Oh, great to hear from Tom McCullough. Damon, I'm sensing that you wish he'd been your race engineer back in the day.
Yeah, I think it's a really key point that he made, and it's something I experience with Adrian Newey as well, when he's building and working with designers and engineers, you have to give it to a human being at the end. The product has to be used, the tool has to be usable by the driver, and the driver quite often senses stuff that they can't see on data. They quite often say this, but at the end of the day, even if it is just a feeling, you get to give the driver a good feeling. It's no good if the driver is constantly saying to you there's something not right. You just ignore it and say, well, it looks right from my end. That's not really what the objective is. The objective is to give it to the guy who can get 100% out of himself or herself, and therefore get 100% out of the car that you have.
Well, you get the feeling from Tom McCullough, don't you, that Aston are only going to get better during this triple header. He thought Silverstone would be, the team's best chance. And my God, that really is a home race for them. They can walk from the factory to the racetrack, and then Austria, he said, was going to be better. But they need to see how those updates are going to work in Barcelona. But Damon, it's almost the end of the show. Can we just do a whole bunch of predictions now in terms of who do you think is going to have had the most successful triple header, and who do you think is going to win the Spanish Grand Prix?
I'm going to say that this is going to be a return of Red Bull's dominance window of opportunity. I think that Max and even Checo could be up there. I think their car is going to be better suited to these tracks, but it's going to be close. And I don't think it's going to be a total walkover. So I think tactically, I think in the race, I think it still could be an opportunity for a number of teams, the usual suspects, McLaren, Ferrari, and also Mercedes. But I mean, it's interesting that I'm saying the usual suspects. I'm including McLaren in that now. But there you are. I think that's the state of play we have.
So this weekend, Spanish Grand Prix, you see a Max Verstappen victory, do you?
I'm not totally as confident of that prediction as I might have been in the past. So let's leave it at that. But there's a chance. I don't know what Ferrari are going to do. I mean, it could even be that Mercedes actually have really broken through a little glass ceiling that they had there. So it could be that they could spring a surprise.
Yeah, well, and qualifying is going to be so close, because now that we no longer have the last chicane in Barcelona and just those two quick corners.
I never liked that chicane. That last corner was epic.
Yeah.
The last corner was such a real, you could drill it in there, and it just felt fantastic coming out onto the straight.
Well, and present tense, Damon, present tense, because it's now the case, isn't it? That the drivers are taking it in 7th gear or something completely ridiculous now. But Damon, it's now just a 71 second lap, 72 second lap. So it's a really short lap as a result. And we saw two cars set an identical lap time in Montreal last time out. In fact, that was a 72 second lap. I think it was a 1:12.000, wasn't it, that took pole position in Montreal. And we could see something very similar this weekend. The drivers are going to need to bring their A game. The slightest mistake and you can be back 3 rows on the grid, can't you?
This is where we're at now. It's a case of getting as close as possible to your optimum lap, no mistakes. You can't just muscle a time out. You're up against the limitations of the car. It's the closest we've got to this circuit. It's the closest we've got to kind of high speed oval, I think. It's the constant average speed is quite high, even without lots and lots of straights. It's just you're constantly cornering.
And Damon, given that you asked, my predictions for Spain.
What's your predictions for Spain, Tom? Sorry, I thought I was the guest, but I'm not. Obviously, we're both. This is both of our shows.
It's our show, Damon. It's our show. It's
Apologies.
Our show. Damon, I think you're right. I think Red Bull. I think Max. Sorry, when I say Red Bull, I mean Max is going to be back up there. Let's not forget that Checo qualified 11th at this racetrack last year. I think Max is going to be back up there. I think Oscar Piastri is going to be right at the sharp end.
You just plug that out because you think it's about time he won a race. That's what are you basing that on?
Well, no, I'm basing that on that I think he's very good. He's very like his manager, Mark Webber. He loves fast corners. You've just told me and the listeners that Barcelona is as close to an oval, right?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking this is high-speed corners. This is Oscar Piastri territory. And if the McLaren is good, which we think it will be, then I think Piastri will be challenging. So I'm going to go a Verstappen win, Piastri second, Lando Norris third. There we are. Another race completed. Another disappointing performance from our F1 fantasy team, F1 Nation Racing. We did say we could blame Damon if we didn't do well in Canada, because his prediction of a McLaren 1-2 in Montreal inspired us to back fully the Papaya army and have both Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri in our team. And to be fair to Damon, they did score the majority of our measly 102 points, but with disappointing weekends for Yuki Tsunoda, Alex Albon and Williams, all of whom are in our team as well, we really could have done with both McLarens on the podium at least. And as a result, we've dropped to, are you ready for this? P134,185 in the F1 Nation World Championship, which does have a new leader in the form of Raktai Vagan on 2,411 points. They're 21 clear of Ford and Ferrari, with Skipper 123 a further 19 points behind in third. I'm quite confident of a double McLaren podium in Barcelona, so we'll stick with Lando and Oscar, and Tom McCullough fancied Aston to get stronger throughout the triple header, with Silverstone likely to be their best chance. So we're going to bring in Fernando Alonso for Yuki Tsunoda. Fernando's addition has given us very little left to spend within the cost cap, so we've had to remove Alex Albon and replace him with his less expensive teammate Logan Sargent. So that's a lineup of Norris, Piastri, Alonso, Ricciardo and Sargent, with McLaren and Williams as our constructors. So let's see how we go. And remember, you can join F1 Fantasy at any time. Just go to the official F1 website or app, create your team and join the F1 Nation World Championship 2024 to compete against us, and probably beat us, and other listeners. And remember, you have until the start of qualifying for the Spanish Grand Prix to make any changes to your team. Good luck. Now, qualifying for the Spanish Grand Prix starts at 4 p.m. CET, with the race at 3 p.m. Check the official F1 website or app for your local timings, and you can watch all the action on F1 TV. And don't forget that it's also round 3 of F1 Academy this weekend as well. Well, Damon, thank you very much for your time. Thanks to Tom McCullough as well for his. And as I mentioned earlier, don't forget to check out this week's episode of F1 Beyond the Grid with James Allison on your podcast app and the official F1 YouTube channel. That's from Wednesday. And a reminder that you can be at a race this season as well. To book your seat at the US Grand Prix, the Las Vegas Grand Prix, or another thrilling spectacle on the 2024 calendar, please go to tickets.formula1.com. We'll of course be back next Monday from the Barcelona paddock with our review of the Spanish Grand Prix. But for now, F1 Nation is produced by Formula 1 and Audio Boom Studio.